Well, hello, everybody. I think we're going to get going here. If everybody could find a seat. And I guess we got a pretty good mic going tonight, so it doesn't matter so much if you're up front, but you could probably see better. It's a little more intimate as far as the questions at the end if you can squeeze up front a little more, but whatever you feel comfortable with. This is, I think, the 5th public meeting that we've had in the library. We had 4 of them last year, and we are now well into our campaign for a community Bill of Rights here in Columbus. There have been several of us in the room that have been at this for about 4 years with the oil and gas industry, trying to understand the complex issues in Ohio of what oil and gas extraction means these days. And we've been finding more and more over the last 4 years that it's almost impossible, or actually pretty impossible, for people to do anything about it. In other words, whether it's zoning or anything, to stop it and so forth. And so after 4 years, we really think that local control is the answer. And with Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, we have our Community Bill of Rights. They have over 150 ordinances and bans around the country. The Community Bill of Rights seems to be the best way to go about this. And I hope everybody's seen our website. If not, we've got a lot of information for our website. Well, tonight we have Dr. Julie Weatherington-Rice with us to give you some science about the whole issue. And Dr. Rice is an adjunct professor at Ohio State University. She's with the OSU Department of Food, Agriculture, and Bioengineering. She's been there for 11 years, but she's been a senior scientist for 29 years with Bennett & Williams Environmental Consultants, Inc. And in 2013, Julie was awarded the Ohio Environmental Council's Environmental Watchdog Award. They give those out every year for life's work in protecting and preserving Ohio's surface and groundwater and soils. And Julie is our watchdog and scientific expert in the area here. We really rely on Julie for her information. Aside from her expertise in geological aspects of soil and water pollution, she has a firm understanding of the regulatory environment in Ohio regarding water source management. And as we have worked with Julie over the past years, the regulatory environment that is supposed to keep activities of the oil and gas industry in Ohio within boundaries that are reasonably safe for inhabitants within the state. And over the past year, Julie has been researching data from the state of West Virginia to ascertain radium levels of solid shale waste that the state is tracking of the leachates from quarantined monocells in landfills. They quarantined this stuff in West Virginia and Pennsylvania. In contrast, Ohio neither uses monocells nor monitors or tracks, but a very small percentage of the tens of thousands of tons of solid radioactive shale waste that ends up being disposed of here and around the state. Part of Julie's work has led her to research information that indicates, as many of us have suspected for years, that the protocol approved by the EPA, that's the Environmental Protection Agency, and most used for state-sanctioned testing in Ohio to measure radium levels in solid shale waste samples, is woefully inadequate for the job. And I'm sure you'll find her presentation interesting and informative, so please welcome to our public forum, Dr. Julie Weatherington-Rice.
Now, I can either hold this or talk with it. So if I start to weave in and out, because I tend to turn my head, holler, and I'll just hold it. Okay, now. Okay, tonight's going to be a little bit of a history, social studies, legal presentation, because over the years I've discovered that if I want to go ahead and change something because something isn't working, the first thing I have to figure out is, how did we get here in the first place? What went right or what went wrong to get us where we are? And then the next thing you have to do is figure out just exactly what has to be fixed. And once you figure out just what has to be fixed, then you can start thinking about workarounds of how to fix it if it's even possible. I am now, 4 years into this? I worked on oil and gas issues back in the 1980s when the Ohio Department of Natural Resources had their Oil and Gas Regulatory Review Commission. They needed somebody that knew something about groundwater, and they needed a girl, and we were pretty thin on the ground at that time, so I was appointed to then in the 80s. We got it together. Things were pretty good in the 1980s. Oil and gas got sleepy. We didn't do anything for 25 years. And all of a sudden, we woke up to horizontal drilling, and we'd been had. We've absolutely been had. And as we've gone through and figured out what bills got passed and what court cases went forward, it's pretty clear to those of us who have been looking at it that we were set up. And we were set up by the oil and gas industry, by ALEC, and by our friends in the House and Senate and in the governor's office who put forward bills that were written by ALEC, passed, took nice campaign contributions. And, you know, I think if you take more than $100 from somebody, you're bought. Well, they took a whole lot more than that. And they did what they were supposed to do. They got them passed, got them signed, and here we are. And we have no rights at all. And here's why. This is my disclaimer. I always put this up because it basically says if you're talking to a soil scientist, a geologist, a registered sanitarian, an engineer, we have a code of ethics. We have to tell you what is real. And since my position at OSU is with a cooperative extension department, I do public speaking, I do public education. That's my role. And I have to be absolutely correct in what I say, because if I don't, I can lose my adjunct position, I can lose my certification, I can lose my registration. I have to be able to demonstrate that everything I say is accurate. Now, why is that important? Well, because if you're in public relations, if you're a politician or you're a political appointment, you don't have to be bound by that. So if somebody comes and talks to you about oil and gas, find out what their background is and find out what they know. Because if they are coming to you from one of these other places, they can tell you anything they jolly well want to. Because spin is what it's about. You see it on the Sunday morning ads about how wonderful shale country is and how everything's perfect and nothing goes wrong. Well, we're going to see what's going wrong. Okay, Ohio is not new to oil and gas drilling. We started about 1860. We have upwards of 300,000 wells in the state of Ohio. We only know where about half of them are. The rest of them are abandoned without being properly sealed. Casings were pulled in the First and Second World War for the metal drives. Somebody'd stick down some rocks, or they'd stick down some, maybe a black locust fence post, and that'd be about it. And those holes are still there, and they are still connected to the surface and to our groundwater. And so anything you put down into those formations, even if the injection well works, if you've got old holes in that same formation, you've got the ability to have stuff come back up. And this is really important to remember, because until recently, all the injection wells we ever had in the state of Ohio were old production wells. And we just simply put the fluids back into the middle of the fields because it was called enhanced recovery, and it made a lot of sense. That isn't what this is about now. This is about waste. This is about getting rid of stuff. So I'm going to read this to you because this is critically important, whether you're a public water supply or whether you are a citizen. Mineral exploration and extraction in a public source water protection area. And we're talking about the water for the city of Columbus and the surrounding areas, are non-conforming, potentially polluting land uses. They are the only remaining major land uses of this category that are not either precluded or regulated on a federal or state level, or are they managed by local management in local source water protection plans? Everything else, either you can't put it in your water supply, or if it's there, you can zone it. Mineral extraction doesn't fit this. And that's how we got to where we are. Since it's not precluded or locally managed, then it gets viewed through federal and Ohio mineral laws. These are not environmental laws. These are not water laws. These are mineral laws. Oil and gas, coal, rock, sand and gravel, etc. And they do not traditionally recognize the importance of source water protection. It's a whole nother set of the code. And until recently, never the twain should meet. Now, if you have a water supply and you get dewatered because of oil and gas development, or you get contaminated because of oil and gas development, you have recourse through the courts. If you're dewatered, you're going to argue under Klein versus American Aggregates, and you'll go through the Ohio court system. If you are contaminated, you'll use the Federal Clean Water Act, and you'll go through the federal courts. But the thing that's really important to remember is that both conditions require litigation in civil court. You have to sue if you've been damaged. They both require that you've already been harmed. You've already lost your water supply, or it's really gotten gunked up. And most importantly, they are unsecured claims in bankruptcy court. So if you're a smart oil and gas driller, you've set up a limited liability corporation for that one well. It's causing a problem, you go bankrupt, you walk. And it doesn't matter how much it costs to make the community whole again, because there's no money to do it. Now, you want to be proactive. You want to protect your water supply ahead of time, and don't we all? Because after all, we all drink. And so folks decided, okay, let's be proactive and let's start thinking about what we can do to protect our water supplies. Well, here's the problem. We're boxed in by a couple of Ohio Supreme Court decisions, and one Supreme Court decision and one Court of Appeals decision. And what we find is that in Ohio courts, they typically fine for the mineral owners. So if you say, we don't want you to drill here because you'll damage our water supply, the courts will say, takings, you got to buy the supply. You got to buy the resource. And we have had two major lands unsuitable for coal mining cases that have shaped these decisions. The first one in the 1990s, the case in the 1990s was a little aquifer in Guernsey County, a little town called Pleasant City, sand and gravel aquifer. Only water in that whole area of Guernsey County. They were supplying everybody and their brother and all the surrounding towns during the summertime because they had water. And Ohio Department of Natural Resources said, well, these are lands unsuitable because the coal company wanted to dig up the sand and gravel aquifer, mine the coal out from underneath it, and then put all the sand and gravel back, and that was supposed to make the aquifer fine. And DNR said, wait a minute, this is not going to work. These are lands unsuitable. No. So the coal company sued ODNR. And in one of the most harebrained decisions, and I will not mention who the person was that wrote it because she's from Worthington, I'll never forgive her, they decided that no, DNR really did owe the coal company for their coal. They owed them the retail cost of the coal. They didn't deduct the cost of mining it. They didn't deduct the $4.5 million it was going to cost them to replace the wetlands. They didn't deduct the value of the water. DNR got stuck with a $5 million fine for Pleasant City. $5 million for one coal seam under one well field. It almost shut the department down. DNR can never, ever, ever declare a water resource as a lands unsuitable again, because they cannot afford to buy the resource. And so when the city or the village of Barnesville tried to get their reservoirs, which supply all the water for 80 square miles in 4 counties, as lands unsuitable for strip mining, DNR said, no, we can't. And it was upheld because DNR could not afford to buy the coal. And it is these two decisions that puts DNR in a position of never being able to say no, because they don't have the money to make it whole. Now, okay, that's the legal law cases that box us. The others are a series of Ohio administrative and Ohio revised code changes. In 1986, the Federal Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Bill, EPCRA, was passed. And it's overseen by US EPA, and essentially, Ohio requires that the holders of toxic and hazardous materials have to report annually to the State Emergency Response Commission, the local emergency planning agency, and the local first responders, which is typically your fire department. So if you've got something that you've got at your facility that is a hazardous waste, and you're keeping it there, you have to let your local fire department know so that if you get a spill or a fire or an explosion, they know what they've got to come and deal with. Federal Law 86, 2001, in House Bill 94, which was the budget bill, which is like a 3,000 to 4,000 page document, someone slips in a set of language that removes the oil and gas industry from federal EPCRA requirements and carves out a sweetheart deal. This is 2001. We don't start drilling seriously till 2011, okay? That's 10 years before we start drilling. And instead of reporting to your local fire department, you tell DNR what you've got at your site. 60 days after you're done, okay? Think about it. 60 days after you're done, you have to tell them what you've got on the site. And that's supposed to protect you in case of any kinds of accidents whatsoever. The problem was that nobody who really cared about protecting water noticed this sleight of hand. Nobody knew it happened and reported it to the federal government. So the federal government didn't know that Ohio had exempted oil and gas. And so now we have this codified Ohio Revised Code and Administrative Code that says you don't have to tell your local fire department what you've got out at the site. In 2004, Tom Niehaus, who was at that point in time chair or Speaker of the House, put in an ALEC drafted bill that preempted all local zoning. Until 2004, local zoning applied. So if you were working on your wellhead protection thanks to the 1986 amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act, or if you're working with your reservoirs with the 1996 amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act, which local public water supplies have to adhere to. It's a federal requirement. They were able to zone. But in 2004, thanks to Tom Niehaus's little bill, thanks to ALEC, all local zoning got removed. And so you thought you had the ability to protect. You lost it. And In 2010, Tom Neathouse, who has since moved then to be president of the Senate, passes another little ALEC bill. And this one upholds the first one, and it takes all power away from all the other state agencies and gives it all to ODNR, oil and gas, including health issues, including environmental protection issues, including everything that revolves around oil and gas production for all reasons. They have primacy. And it does not address the issue of source water protection management requirements at all. So we have now lost all local control and all local protection, and we don't even have Ohio Department of Health and EPA in primacy positions to take care of things like radioactivity, oil or water and soil and air contamination. They're subservient. So now DNR is in a box because they can't say you can't put it here because they can't afford to make you whole. And they can't say, gee, we don't know enough to say whether you can do this or not because the Ohio Administrative Code has just said they do. So now they're in a real box. And they are very much a captive agency. I wouldn't want to be DNR for anything in the world right now. In 2012, we passed another bill, Senate Bill 315, but before that, here's where we are. We're now in a box that says you can put an oil and gas drilling pad 50 feet away from a stream or a lake. Doesn't matter if you're in the middle of a 100-year floodplain. Doesn't matter if you're in the middle of a source water protection area. Doesn't matter. 50 feet. That's it. And you can build a 5 or 10 acre pad 300 feet away from a public water supply pumping well. That's the sanitary distance of protection, 300 feet. So there you are in the middle of the well field, and you can have a pad. And that's the law. And there's nothing in the Ohio Revised Code or the Administrative Code to protect by exclusion at this point, public source water protection areas. So before 2012, we are not talking about water at all. In 2012, Senate Bill 315 is passed, and there are some kind of exciting things about this bill. I was horrified. My husband, who has degrees in history and law, says, "Oh no, dear, it's wonderful because the words water are now in mineral extraction law." It says that ODNR can require additional permit requirements in the following areas if they so choose. So if the chief of oil and gas decides that he doesn't want your drilling pad in the 100-year floodplain or in the 5-year time of travel, he could say move it, okay? He can say move it. It's the first time we've ever had anything about protecting water in mineral extraction law. The problem is that if your company decides to challenge as a taking, we haven't overturned Pleasant City. So while the chief has the ability to say, no, you can't put it here, he doesn't have any court protection. So how much is he going to be willing to say, don't put it here, if he doesn't have anything to back him up? And that's a big problem. There's still more changes that are coming out of substitute Senate Bill 165. It's 2010. We are still writing rules on it. There are new draft rules I just saw again today as part of this. And as they go through, when you pass an Ohio Revised Code, you then have to write administrative code that backs it up. And as those rules are being written, they get taken in front of the Joint Committee on Agency Rule Review, JCAR. And they either say yes or no. And it's a committee of like 5 people from the House and 5 for the Senate or something like that. And so it's those rules that govern how the actual process goes forward. So we passed the bills in 2010. We still don't have any rules behind a lot of this stuff. We've got finalized on air permits, but they're standard. And they begin once the well is in production. All of the naturally occurring and technically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive materials are no longer the authority of Ohio Department of Health, who handles all radioactivity except for oil and gas. It goes to oil and gas, who doesn't have anybody that's an expert in radioactivity. And it's important to remember that these materials may be more radioactive than man-made wastes, or that the Safe Drinking Water Act levels allow, because natural doesn't count. So when we monitor these materials, we only look at the stuff that we in Ohio call T-norm. That's not the whole waste stream. It's maybe 5 or 10% of the waste stream. The rest of it's got a Hail Mary pass. And we have very, very limited data, and this decision that Ohio has does not conform to US EPA. We have sent to JCAR and been approved well construction rules. They're better than they were. There's some hodgepodges of things that have passed through. The wetlands reporting has passed. I cannot tell you whether it's being enforced, but it has passed. And there are a whole slew of things that are continuing to be drafted. We just got copies of the final draft rules for well pad construction. I saw them for the first time today. We've been working on this for at least 3 years. They're not finished yet. Now, the reason that things happened in 2012 was because of the North Star site over here, where the injection wells started earthquakes. And we had to stop all permitting of injection wells while the state of Ohio figured out what was going on with earthquakes. So they put together a draft set of rules. And everybody made comments on it, and basically it said, well, as long as we don't put any injection in the basement Precambrian rock, we should be just fine. And the governor in the goodness of his heart, decided to just enforce by emergency the original draft rules and ignored everything everybody had as comments. But according to this, as of 2012, we should never have another earthquake because we figured it out, right? Okay, that's important. Everything else is still going. So please, please, please check this website and please keep commenting. Public water supplies need to comment. Local governments need to comment. People need to comment, because if you do not comment and something goes wrong, you may very well lose your standing because you didn't comment. So if something goes wrong and you lose your water supply and you didn't make comments, well, gee, too bad. Where were you at the commenting period? So it is really critical that communities and that citizens are part of this process. Wait, too far. Okay, now let's go back and talk about this norm and T-norm part, because it becomes really important in Ohio. There are 4 national definitions for norm and T-norm. Ohio uses the Conference of Radiation Control Program Directors definition. It is a 1990 definition. It predates horizontal well drilling anywhere. It is the least restrictive of all the definitions, and in 2013, out of the goodness of our heart, we even watered it down even further. There are 3 other definitions, one by US EPA, National Academy of Science, and ANSI, which is an engineering group. And they all say about naturally occurring radioactive material, if you bring it to the surface and there is a potential for increased exposure, the whole waste stream becomes T-norm. It is subject to testing, and now you're dealing with the number 5. 5 picocuries per gram is the US EPA cleanup standard for radiological contamination. 5 picocuries per liter is the US EPA drinking water maximum contaminant level, and it would apply to the entire waste stream. Ohio does not honor this. We are on a race to the bottom. Ramifications of the 2013 budget bill. Most solids and semi-solids are considered norm. There's no testing of any threshold whatsoever. Radioactive limits before it's landfill, doesn't matter. 90% of the waste just goes to landfill, doesn't care how hot it is. And believe me, some of it is hot enough to be a low-level radioactive nuclear source material. There are no requirements to track where these wastes go. As a matter of fact, the administrative code forbids you to keep records of where you are sending it. So not only do you not have to find out how radioactive it is going into your landfills, you're not allowed to say how much you're sending and where. So we can't even go in and go backwards to figure out what the loading rates are in our landfills, because the ability to do that has been removed by the passage of amended House Bill 59. It was in the budget bill. People fought it hard. It passed. And to make it even worse, Ohio EPA has the ability to assign a beneficial use for these materials. And remember, this is 90% of your waste stream. And they can be used for landfill caps and surface repairs, even above the final cap, and there is no containment requirement at all. Does not matter how radioactive it is, doesn't matter how much heavy metal it has in it, does not matter. It's norm, and therefore it's not a problem. This is not the position that Pennsylvania, West Virginia, or Michigan is taking. Now, okay. Where can it go? It can go to any construction and demolition debris landfill in the state. It can go to any solid waste landfill in the state. If it's an injectable material like the flowback water and the production water, that goes to an injection well. And if you are higher than that 5 on the little bit of stuff that gets counted, then you could just mix it up with something, sawdust or sand or auto fluff or ground up automobiles or fly ash, or it doesn't really matter. You just mix it up so that you dilute it down. No requirements to chemically bind this stuff. Now, the problem is that uranium and radium are water soluble. So if you mix it with something and it gets wet, it just moves out. And no other program that addresses the issue of radioactive material allows down blending, which is what they're doing. It is absolutely forbidden on the federal level for every other waste stream there is. Ohio downblends. So that's where we were as of last year. Now, 2014 was really about EPCRA, or our discovery that we'd been had. And what happened was that there was this stinky oil well over by Grand Lake St. Mary's. And the local fire department was going to go out and look at it, but they were trying to figure out what was there so they knew how to be prepared to go out to this site. You know, what kind of equipment did they need? Did they need gas masks? Were they going to be subject to explosion? What was going to go on? Nobody could find a record anywhere of what was going on at this well. And so Teresa Mills, who many of you know, said, well, didn't it get reported through EPCRA? Well, no, it didn't. Well, we discovered that they weren't reporting through EPCRA. And so Teresa said, you know, I don't think you can do that. I think you have to report through EPCRA to CERC and to the local folks. So she got a hold of US EPA, sent this marvelous document, and said, can they do this? And US EPA Region 5 looked at her petition and said, in a April 30th letter, that Ohio Revised Code Chapter 3750 and 1509 does not supersede the requirement of EPCRA. So, no, you can't. You should have been reporting to EPCRA, to the locals, for the last 13 years. And you haven't done it. So, US EPA says to DNR, tell all your oil and gas people they have to start reporting to EPCRA, to the locals as well. You can keep the system you want if you want to do that, and then they'll have 2 reporting systems. But they have to report to the locals. It's the law. It's a federal law, and you're in violation. So they do. And in June 28th, the Scatsko well pad in Monroe County blows up and burns for 5 days. And nobody knows for hours and hours what's even there. They had reported to EPCRA. They told them that they had condensate and production water. They were in the middle of fracking. Now, fracking, people will tell you, is 95% water and sand and a little bit of chemicals that can't be a problem. Well, you know what? The line burst. The equipment was hot. It went up into a ball of flame and it burned for 5 days. So I don't know very much water and sand that burns for 5 days, but it did. So I'm not sure I believe, I'm a scientist. I have a hard time believing that it's not anything but water and sand, because it burned for 5 days. And everything downstream for 5 miles in Possum Creek was killed. More than 70,000 fish, all the crawdads, all the toads, all the everything was absolutely killed dead. The stream was sterilized. Yeah. EPCRA is the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know. As a local person, you have the right to know what's kept in your community. If it's hazardous and it could cause a problem. So here we were, fire billowing off of the site for 5 days. US EPA and Ohio EPA finally got a list of the chemicals that were on the site 5 days after the fire started. Now, DNR had them 2 days after, but they didn't share that information with anybody. 1.7 miles down on the West Virginia side of the Ohio River, from where Possum Creek dumped in, is a public water supply intake. Those folks have no idea what came down by them. They didn't know for 5 days. Believe me, the plume was long gone. And it turns out that some of the materials that were there aren't even water tests for. So nobody knows what got picked up or how much got diluted. The good news is that the intake was on the other side of the river. But it was a complete failure of a system. So in 2014, the state of Ohio decided that they were going to straighten this out, and they put a rider in Substitute House Bill 490. 490 is the House bill that's supposed to deal with cyanobacteria blue-green algae in Lake Erie. And it's really a good bill. There's some wonderful things in that bill. There are some riders that were attached that were absolutely nightmares. The governor told them to draft it with no longer keeping the rules and program at DNR, to have EPCRA take over and be in charge. Just move away and let the program that's there go. At the last minute, the House representative from Marietta, Ohio, drafted a rider that literally reincorporated everything from the 2001 bill and overturned Ohio's trying to apply to federal program. And there's no indication that if this ever passes, that it's ever going to do anything about the fact that there are going to be two sets of programs. Fortunately, at the end of 2014, when it made it to the Senate committee, the bill died quietly. There are proposed replacement language that is really the original language that's on the website for the Ohio Environmental Council. There's information and testimony on the website for the Ohio Environmental Council. There were gobs of people going down and testifying. And the Ohio Citizen Action has more information on it on their website as well as first responder testimony that says we really shouldn't be doing this. So that's the good news. What we have learned is that, thanks to the Columbus Dispatch, is that the Ohio House and the Republican caucus has decided to break that bill up into 4 separate bills. And I really hope that the blue-green algae passes and assign sponsors. And this whole issue of EPCRA will be in a separate bill. Now, that would be the best possible because then you can go and argue against that bill. What may very well happen, which they've done repeatedly, is they're going to stick in 30 to 40 pages into the budget bill, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of pages long, and which has to pass. If they do that, it'll pass. It'll pass, and we'll be back to where we were, all over again. But even if Ohio passes it, they're still in violation of the federal program. So now they either have to report to both, or, they're in violation. But the other thing that we learned from the Statco fire is that yearly reporting is not enough. It doesn't help you to know at the end of the year what somebody had at that site the year before. What we really need is a list of all the chemicals coming on site 30 days before they show up, so that the 14 volunteer fire departments that went to the fire in Monroe County won't be caught hanging out because they have no idea what they're going to fight. Why nobody died, I don't know. I mean, we've been playing Russian roulette on a pretty high level. So, where does that leave us? Well, currently, Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Oil and Gas, if they wanted to protect our water for the city of Columbus and surrounding areas, would have to buy the oil and gas resources under those areas, because if they didn't, they could be challenged with a taking. Okay, now, they can't afford to do that. So what does that leave us? You have to know what you have to fight. On a state level, we got 2 choices. One is to overturn the Ohio Supreme Court decision on Pleasant City. And there is a way maybe we can do that, because since then there is an amendment to the Ohio Constitution that protects groundwater, and the protection of groundwater under a constitutional amendment is more powerful than the protection of a property right. So maybe there's a way to do it that way. And the other possibility is to pass a House through the Ohio bill through the House and Senate that provides exemption to drilling in source water protection areas and 100-year floodplains, so that we aren't putting DNR in this hamstringing position of, if they decide to do a good thing and say no, they can't get hauled into court for it. They've got law behind them. Those are the 2 statewide solutions. Okay, that's probably not going to happen next week. So now we're looking at what can locals do. And this is a summary for public water supplies. This is a summary for citizens. This is a summary for communities. The first thing you need to do is you need to find out if you even own the minerals under your water supply area. And if there are old wells in those areas, and there are in the northern parts of the watershed, then those mineral rights are probably long gone. You need to find out who owns them. When I do this for public water supplies, this is one of the things we do. We go through and figure out who owns them. Because these things get sold and swapped like subprime mortgages. And also, if you do own them and you don't want anybody to drill under you, and your surrounding neighbors have signed up, you can be pooled. And it can be taken from you. And it happens all the time. So even if you own them and you say no, because you're trying to protect your water supply, you may still lose them. So in eastern Ohio, virtually every public water supply is either is completely surrounded with leased land, or the land under their water supply is leased. That's true for just about all of eastern Ohio. Now, this is us. And it's not just Columbus, it's the greater area. This wonderful map that came from TEDOC, from Frac Trackers. These are the injection wells in the upper Scioto. These are on Big Walnut and Hoover. These are on Alum Creek. And Alum Creek has been contaminated with oil and gas brine since 1960, when they started drilling in Morrow County. Most of the groundwater in Morrow County is destroyed from bad drilling practices in the 1960s. And the salt content was so high in Alum Creek that it was affecting the people in Westerville who were getting their water out of Alum Creek that far down. Right now, the reservoir is diluting. But it's still coming in. It's still coming in. Even if the injection wells don't fail, it's just, you got brine. This is the headwaters to the Olentangy. The Olentangy is Delaware Lake, which is the city of Delaware. It's the upground river reservoirs on the Olentangy River, just north of Mount Ayr. So you literally are looking at virtually all the municipal water supply for this area, and Delaware and the surrounding areas up that way are all hostage to those injection wells. And one of the injection wells in Morrow County was started in 1960, so it's pretty old. You've got some that are down here. The city of Columbus has some well fields here and another one here. But this is Circleville. This is Earnhardt Hill, which is a regional water supply in that area. And right below that is the regional water supply in Ross County. So we theoretically have got all this area potentially contaminated by injection wells. And that doesn't count all the old oil and gas wells that are there. And there are a bunch of them. Many of them never properly sealed. So, if you're going to develop your source water protection, and that's kind of what you're here talking about, the Columbus right to know, and the Columbus's ability to protect their own resource, you need to make sure you inventory everything in your water supply area, including all the oil and gas infrastructure, historic and current. You need to make sure that there's public outreach up into those areas, because even if you're not supplying water to those people, they're the ones that are the boots on the ground. They're the ones that live up there. They're the ones that watch. They're the ones that know what's going on. So you need to reach across and form alliances with the people in Delaware and Morrow County. If there is any active or planned drilling in your area, and you've put together a source water protection management plan and you've got a committee, get somebody from an oil and gas company to be on that committee. They can be a non-voting committee person. But they need to understand what's at stake. Every oil and gas company in this state has to have an environmental bond. It is $5 million for their company for all the wells that they have in the state of Ohio. If the city of Canton loses the Sugar Creek well field, which is 50% of the water for Canton, North Canton, Massillon, and the surrounding areas, 50% of the water for 250,000 people, the closest recovery is to run a pipeline to the reservoir near Alliance, upgrade the water treatment plant at the northwest or northeast field, and it's going to take a year and a half to 2 years at a minimum of $139 million. $5 million for everything in the whole state versus $139 million for one area. Please understand, there's no bucks to take care of it. Advocate for your water supply. That's all I can tell you. If you guys don't, it isn't going to happen. You have to comment on all these rules. You have to be there at the table. You have to give technical comments. And I'm working with the city of Canton trying to protect the public water supplies for the state of Ohio. I'm one person. There are more people, but there are not enough of us. If you don't comment, you can lose standing. And make sure that your Ohio representatives and senators know what your comments are. Make sure that they are kept in the loop. Tell them to introduce some legislation that's going to level the playing field. Now, you're not going to give them as much money as the oil and gas industries are. But oil's down to $50 a barrel, and it costs more than $80 to break even. So maybe the oil and gas industry isn't going to give quite as much money as they were either. The one thing you guys do that they don't do is you vote, and not at the less than 40% we saw at the last election. No funding to make you whole if something goes wrong. Figure out how much it's going to cost you to replace your water supply ahead of time. Figure out how much you're using and document. Figure out what your alternative sources are. Figure out what it's going to cost you to get it up and going. Figure out how much rationing it's going to take to keep you going if you lose that supply. And make sure that you let everybody in the communities know this, because we are all in that watershed. We're talking about Columbus today. But that's most of Central Ohio's water. Let DNR know in writing. Document. Let your senators and representatives, the director know. Let the governor know. Because if anything goes wrong, you're going to have to sue. And you have to document ahead of time that you knew what you were up to and you told them as well. So that they didn't go in and say, oh my God, we had no idea this could be this much of a problem. Triple damages on federal cases if they know ahead of time, assuming that there's any money in the pot to do it. Educate. And there are lots of communities working on something in Ohio. By 2012, we had 30 communities that had some form of a ban in place. Athens updated their wellhead protection plan to exclude injection wells. You can't exclude permitting, but you can exclude injection wells. You just have to exclude all injection wells. So that's what the city of Athens did for their well field. No more new injection wells. City of Cincinnati did the same thing. Not because they were worried about their water supply, they were worried about the earthquakes. Because Cincinnati has more damage per capita every year from landslides than any place else in North America. Much worse than California. They don't want earthquakes, so they don't want injection wells. Mansfield, Yellow Springs, and others have passed charter amendments. Columbus, you guys are talking about it now. And the city of Dayton, which doesn't have a lot of oil and gas in the area, but boy, is in a good place to have injection wells, are also being very careful in monitoring. Now, the little city of Monroe Falls in northwest eastern Ohio decided to take a very proactive position. And what they did was they sued every oil and gas permit in their jurisdiction and said, you have to apply for building permits in our jurisdictional area. And they were upheld in local court. So nobody was able to put in a well in Monroe Falls. Well, Beck Oil decided to challenge that, and it's now in the Ohio Supreme Court. We have been told since last summer the decision is any day. This is a critical case because Pleasant City was 9-0 against the people. If we can even get a split decision, this begins to break things up. So this becomes really important. Okay, so, well, it's not a problem, never going to happen anyway. This is just the major events in 2014. March 2014, earthquakes in Poland, Ohio, connected to shale gas extraction wells. Remember, we solved that in 2012. These are extraction. This is fracking. This is the first time in North America anybody's documented that fracking wells can cause earthquakes. May 4th, 2014, in Morgan County, we have a well leak, and 7 are evacuated. June 25th, 2014, we've got a gas well blowout in Monroe County, the first of the Monroe County disasters. The 28th, we've got the Stat Oil site burning for 5 days in Monroe County, poor Monroe County. The 31st, we've got an injection well in Warren that are causing earthquakes again. Remember, these are not down into the basement rock. Now, how come these are earthquaking? September 24th, we've got an admissions violation. This is air violation at a Carroll County compressor station. They're spewing stuff in the air that's in violation of the air permit. October of that year, we have a pipeline fire in Monroe County. Pipeline goes off, explodes and starts burning. And on the 19th of that same month in Guernsey County, we have an explosion and 1 person is injured. The 28th of October in Jefferson County, we have another well blowout. 400 families are evacuated. Now, you can put in a well pad 100 feet from a house. How big is the area for 400 families to be evacuated? Because that's how big the setbacks should have been. November the 12th, Noble County, we've got another explosion and a worker is killed. We're starting to see fatalities. And on the 13th of December, we get yet another well in Monroe County that lets loose. It doesn't catch fire. It just simply lets loose and spews out raw gas until the 24th of December. How many thousands and millions of cubic feet of methane went out? Nobody knows. So that's just last year, okay? So do we have a reason to be concerned? Yes, we have a reason to be concerned because guess what, folks? We are now getting track records. We should be learning something here. All right, now, that's the talk I was going to give tonight. Carolyn asked me to talk about another thing, and I am running long, and I'm sorry, Carolyn. We talked last year, about a year and a half ago, about cuttings being composted at a landfill site in Columbus, right near Alum Creek. And we were looking at that point at the data about how radioactive these materials were. And we were assured by Ohio EPA and the owner of the facility that these materials weren't very radioactive at all. And Greg and I were sitting there and looking at this data, and we were saying, wait a minute, this is US EPA Safe Drinking Water Finished Water Laboratory tests. How can you use that on ground-up rock? We think there's a problem. Well, sure enough, there was. And we've learned a whole lot in the last year. Basically, it's the wrong tests being used on samples for radiologic levels. The measure levels are too low and the counting times are too short, which means what you see reported isn't what you've got. And while it is possible to modify these tests, there are no standards to modify them to make them work. So it turns out there is no official US EPA method for testing radiological materials, shale, their levels. The agencies know the finished drinking water 900 levels. They know them very well. Labs are certified for them. It is a wet laboratory method. You precipitate, you add water, or you take the water, you precipitate out your materials, your dissolved solids, onto a plate, and you count them for 2 hours. US EPA has basically expected all of the state EPAs and DEPs to use the 900 methods for radiology on shale waste. Well, for shale waste, it's the wrong test. Because it involves evaporating the sample to a thin layer on a stainless steel platchet and then counting it. It's wet chemistry. It precipitates out a solution. It evaporates the water. It leaves a very thin layer, and the count time is 2 hours. Finished drinking water is clear, cleaned, and ready to drink. Shale wastes are ground-up rock cuttings, sludges, slurries, filter socks, flowback water, brines, scales, and landfill leachate. They are full of solids, total suspended solids, total dissolved solids, heavy metals, and salt. There is nothing clean, clear, or ready to drink about them. And a very important study was released in July of last year, done by US EPA and the Radiological Laboratory at University of Iowa. And what they were doing was looking at all of the different standard ways that people would measure radiological materials or readings in these materials, and measured them against what's considered the gold standard, which is put together by the U.S. Department of Energy. U.S. EPA, U.S. Department of Energy. We now have a turf battle, okay? What they found was that what was killing the system was the total solids. Because remember, if you have drinking water, you can see through it. There are very little total dissolved solids in it. Well, the 55-gallon drum that they had of Marcellus flowback and produced water had about 278,000 parts per million of total solids. And what they found was there was no way they could dilute this thing enough to not be overwhelmed when they precipitated out their materials. So here's what they got. This is the standard. This is, you put it in a jar, you add a little agar gum, you seal it up for 21 days, you put it into a gamma spectrometer, you count it for 16 hours. This is where you want to be. This is what they got with the 900 methods. With every modification they could come up with, less than 1% of the actual reading. And what they decided was that precipitation and concentration is not effective. The tests are barium sulfate, which is the 903 way. You can also pre-concentrate radon on manganese oxide. You can use a disc, a filter disc. That worked a little better, but not very well. They actually had better results with counting the radon by a mineral oil extraction and liquid scintillation counting, but of course that's not an EPA certified process at all. And why they don't just say, okay, we know that it works using the 21-day hold 16-hour count. But that would mean that US EPA would have to agree with the US Department of Energy standard. And so then we have a power struggle. The other thing is that you don't destroy your sample, which means you can set it back on the shelf and 3 years later check it again. To do the kinds of testing that you do for the Safe Drinking Water Act, you destroy the sample and it can never be retested. Now, if you don't want to know something's there, wouldn't you use a system that would give you a really low number and you could never redo it again? Okay? I'm getting a little skeptical here. Now, the Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania has just released a new radiation study that they worked on for over a year. These are the links. It is a huge report. It's 200 pages long. There are all kinds of appendices. I don't even pretend to have read the whole thing. But what I can tell you is that if you look at the news report, it says, no problems, everything's right. If you go back and look through the actual data, that isn't what it says. And the numbers that they're getting for radiological counts for the Marcellus, which is what they looked at, everything from the shale to the flowback water to the brine, are within the ranges that USGS said they ought to get. So yes, they are contaminated, and they are turning stuff away from landfills on a regular basis, even though their monitoring is detecting about 10 times higher than they think it is. Okay, we're still working on the paper. I don't know if I'll ever get it done. I will, because we'll get a Supreme Court decision on Monroe Falls, and it'll get finished, and here are the contact people. So that is, as quickly as I can do this, is about an hour from when I started. And you've had a civics lesson. You know what the problems are. You know what you have to do to change it statewide. You have to replace the Ohio Supreme Court or the House and the Senate and the governor. Those are your choices, okay? If you're not going to do that, then you're going to have to do it locally because that's all we've got. And expect people not to be happy that you're doing it. Okay.
Everybody give her a hand, thank you.
Yes.
We'll have some questions and answers in just a second, okay, Karen? I want to give a little bit out about the Bill of Rights, and then we'll have some question and answers. But they usually kick us out of here. They'll make an announcement in 10 minutes, and then we have to be out of here before 9. Okay, but real quick, I want to talk with you about the Columbus Community Bill of Rights. This is a ballot initiative. It's actually a Bill of Rights that will be an amendment to the Charter of Columbus. And it will take the Columbus voters to get it on the ballot. We have to get 10,000 signatures. And once it's on the ballot in November, it has to pass. And then it would be part of the Charter of Columbus, which is like the Constitution of Columbus. And it's a 2-page legal document that we were helped write by the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. They're in Pennsylvania. They've helped about 150 communities create their own Bill of Rights. Basically, it's not just for fracking. It is a rights-based amendment that says, we the people of Columbus stand for our inalienable rights for pure water, clean air, safe soil, a right for a sustainable energy future, and a right for local control over offending industries. Basically, that's the Bill of Rights. And then it's 2 pages. There's definitions of, and it's focused, this Bill of Rights, the second page is focused on the shale gas industry. So if there's another industry that would come into Columbus, say we passed this, another industry that was a different offense, then we would have to amend this Bill of Rights and add that second industry that is offending a city. So the reason why I got to this place was I went to every lawmaker last year, every single state House representative and senator, and told them how I felt about fracking, that it was dangerous. I had 2,000 signatures of Ohioans saying they wanted to ban fracking. If you were a Democrat or Republican and you lived in shale district, you were a pro-fracker in Ohio. I would say there might be 5 people in the whole General Assembly that would say, maybe it's not a good idea. So basically the political will is to make it very easy for fracking, shale gas extraction, pipelines, all this to happen. And what's even more egregious is that we, Ohio, we import 50% of Pennsylvania's waste. More than that. And we also, how much?
West Virginia, more than 50% of what's being deposited in Ohio is coming from out of state. We're getting close to 60% of what we are taking into our landfills and our injection wells are coming from out of state. So we aren't just dealing with our waste. We are importing, and as much of a problem that we've got with the drilling, it's the waste streams coming in that's the biggest problem.
And that's why Columbus people, they think, well, why is this impacting us? I mean, it's happening over in the east, they're fracking over there, Carroll County, Monroe County. Well, the injection wells, as you saw in the little, the slide up here, and also we have a poster back there, we already have, 13 working injection wells in our watershed. It's going to impact our water. And this is not just the natural radioactive shale, which comes back up, but it's also the carcinogens, the endocrine disruptors, and the neurotoxins of chemicals that they put into the frac cocktail when they fracture a well. So the Columbus Community Bill of Rights is a Columbus ballot initiative. So you have to be a Columbus voter to sign the Bill of Rights. However, you do not have to be a Columbus resident to help. I am a Bexley resident, and I got involved with this because Bexley buys our water from Columbus. We all are impacted by the Columbus area watershed. So, before you leave, please take this little talking points flyer, and on the back of it, you'll see Julie's presentation. And there's another presentation at the end of the month on February 23. Tish O'Dell, she's the Ohio Community Rights Network director. But she's the one that passed a Bill of Rights in Broadview Heights near Cleveland. They were drilling vertical wells in backyards next to schools in her community. It was like a suburb. And they passed a Bill of Rights, and there's been no more drilling in Broadview Heights. They didn't ban the ones that were already there, but when they were done, they would cap them. So Columbus Community Bill of Rights will keep infrastructure out of Columbus. That means pipelines out of Columbus. It will keep all drilling of any kind of fracking and any kind of waste in Columbus. Just Columbus. But there is a paragraph that talks about neighboring counties and communities. If they impact negatively our water, then we can take them to court. That is part of the Bill of Rights. I would suggest, on the back of here is the website. The 2-page document is on the website. I suggest you look at it. It's legalese, but it's not hard to read. And it's just 2 pages. And what we really need is to get this on the ballot. We need signatures. In May, there's going to be an election. We need someone at every polling station to help us get signatures so that we can actually get this conversation in the open and really protect our water. I agree with Julie. Julie is down working with the State House in regulation. She's working with all the professional environmentalists. But this is something a concerned citizen can do. This is what we can do, and it will only positively impact Columbus. It's about, protecting our water, our air, our soil, our health and welfare of our children, and moving forward to sustainable energy. It's not a requirement for sustainable energy. It's just a right. So, with that being said, thank you so much for coming out and taking interest on a cold, snowy night. I do want to put a shout out for the Free Press. They have been the one, Lauren Aaronshield at the Dispatch has done a couple pieces on us, but the Free Press has given a lot of time and a lot of coverage of this ballot initiative, and almost anything that the Dispatch won't cover because it's too controversial. They're willing and brave enough to put things out there, and I would love if you have a business and you can support them, but putting some advertising in their paper, we need to help keep them solvent because we need their voice in this community. I also want to put a shout out for Will. Why don't you stand up, Will? Will Petrick, is that right?
That is right, yeah.
Okay, he is running for city council, and I do not know his whole platform, but Greg Pace, who is one of the organizers, met with him. He is running, and he needs signatures to get on the ballot to run for city council. There's going to be 5 new positions in city council. It's our opportunity to talk with these people and to tell them how we feel about protecting our water. We're really glad you were here to learn this information because it's so important. So before you leave tonight, please sign the petition for the Columbus Community Bill of Rights and sign this petition just to let him get on the ballot so people can vote. And there's a couple other things I would like to mention. Move to Amend is a group that is working nationally to, Michael, give us a nutshell.
Yeah, everything you mentioned was things that we could be doing here locally to fight an already existing situation which blocks just about everything from being done. And that is corporate personhood. The Supreme Court established status which makes corporations equal to persons and able to use the laws that are for people to get their way, and they have a lot more money than we do to fight it. So Move to Amend is a national initiative to get a grassroots initiated effort going from the cities to the states requesting a constitutional amendment in Washington. And we cannot do it by going to Congress because none of the people in Congress are going to want to do anything that will reduce the money they have available or the power of corporations who feed them. It has to be a grassroots, bottom-up way to do this. We have 16 states that have already indicated a wish to have a constitutional amendment. When we have 34, then we can get it done. So Move to Amend and the amendment of the Constitution would deal in the long term, when we can get it, with issues not just like this, but campaign finance reform, education, criminal justice, immigration, and on, all issues in our surrounding, in our life, that are being blocked by corporations whose sole purpose is to obtain profit at the lowest possible level. So I'd certainly invite you to think about becoming involved with that, in addition to working locally on this. This may make change with CELDEF's help, but the long-term change is only going to be done through amending the Constitution, getting corporations out of it, and money out of speech.
Thank you, Michael. Move to Amend. When you read about it, learn about it and see what you can do to help.
Sign our petition.
And they have a petition back there as well. Now, I would like to give you a minute. You're going to hear an announcement. Don't worry, we can be here for a little while. Just hold tight for some questions from you for Julie, okay?
Yes?
Yeah, the announcement mentioned the involvement in ALEC in this. To your knowledge, what was the role of ALEC in promoting some of these legislation and the court decisions, or have you monitored that much?
Excuse me, the role of what, please?
The American Legislative.
I know that they wrote the 2004 and 2010 bills.
Okay.
I know they wrote those for sure.
Okay.
There are certainly a whole lot of members in the House and Senate that are members of ALEC. We don't know for sure if they wrote the 2001 EPCRA one or not. Nobody's able to go that far back and track. But we know they wrote the 2004, we know they wrote the 2010, we know they've been involved with everything since then. Yes?
You mentioned the radioactive possibility of material put into landfills, and that it can't be reported, it can't be whatever.
Right.
Is there any, are there measurements that have been made to establish the existence?
Oh, yeah. Pennsylvania and West Virginia. As a matter of fact, West Virginia now has separate dedicated cells, and they are testing their leachate from those cells for 43 different parameters every month. We are just simply mixing it in the landfill and not even testing for it.
So we're not doing any testing?
Oh, no, we're doing virtually nothing. Virtually nothing. And we're taking in the solid waste from West Virginia, we're taking in the solid waste from Pennsylvania, we're taking in just about everybody's injectable waste, because there are almost no injection wells in Pennsylvania and West Virginia because they are approved by US EPA, and it takes them 3 years to get one approved. In Ohio, they're done by ODNR and they're approved in a matter of a few weeks. So if you've got an old oil and gas well and it's not rusted through, and maybe even if it is, you can turn it into an injection well. Yes?
Comment and question. The comment is, I recently bought a house and we had an issue with the mineral rights because the title company has traditionally secured the mineral rights, and they won't do that right under the house anymore. And this is something I checked with them.
Depending upon where you are, you probably don't own them anymore. They got severed 100 years ago. But I know that we have the mineral rights under our house in Worthington. Not that anybody would want them, but we've got them.
And the question is Governor Kasich an ALEC member? Is he on the board? This is what I've heard.
I don't know the answer to that one.
He was one of the Michael's, right? He was one of the founders.
Founders of ALEC?
Yeah, he was one of the early on.
You one of the founding members?
Yeah. I mean, in their literature, they actually refer to him in thanking.
Is he still a member? Don't know.
I mean, the membership
Emeritus.
is secret, right? I mean, so, but it was started around his political circle, kind of the anti-tax, low budget deregulation.
I mean, the take-home message for this is Ohio got.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 30 minutes.
The take-home message is we got set up. And we didn't realize it was happening because we didn't even know that this was something that existed. So, but the oil and gas industry knew they were coming to Ohio a long time before we knew they were coming. Yes?
Isn't there an option to get a referendum to stop injection wells? I mean, you had a couple different options, but I think Bob said you need 300,000 signatures throughout the whole state. I know there's certain areas of the state that have stopped it. But
that again gets back to, in effect, if you could get a referendum passed, then you could change the Constitution for the state of Ohio and get a referendum passed. Are you thinking of as an amendment?
whatever avenue would be the most...
Yes, it is possible. It's not going to be easy. I mean, that was the whole point of what I was trying to explain, is there are statewide things you can do, but these are really big statewide things you can do, which is why the idea of biting off smaller local efforts may get us there in the end. And there are success stories already through Ohio of other communities that have passed these charter amendments and other kinds of efforts. So it isn't like nobody's tried. But we're waiting for the Supreme Court decision on Monroe Falls. And Bedford Heights has been challenged, and they are supposed to hear the oral arguments in another couple of months at the Supreme Court level. So it may be that the reason we're not getting Monroe Falls out is they're waiting to see what happens with the Bedford Heights case as well. So there are plenty of people out there willing to fight it through the Supreme Court. And we do not have a Supreme Court that really recognizes we need to protect the water resources of the state of Ohio. If you look at it, if you take care of the air, the soil, and the water, and you're honest about taking care of the air, the soil, and the water, you can take care of every environmental problem there is on the whole earth, including climate change. It's that simple. It's that basic. You take care of the air, the water, and the soil, and you take care of them all. But if you don't, then that's how we get to where we are. Yes, sir, back there.
2 questions. It would seem that our city council in Columbus would be receptive to passing the Community Bill of Rights on their own. Second question, are there any states or a state that's doing this right?
Carolyn, you know more about this than I do.
Yeah.
I'm just a scientist.
Some cities have passed ordinances. Cincinnati's is an ordinance to ban injection wells, but an ordinance can be overturned the next day. It depends, and a lot of times in Niles they did a ordinance against fracking, and the industry came in and talked with the city council members, and they changed their mind the next week. So a charter amendment has to be voted on, and then in order to change, it has to be voted on again. Most cities do not want to adopt this because they will be sued by ODNR, by the state, and by the industry, because ODNR has complete jurisdiction. And so they're not going to give up without a fight. What's happened in Broadview Heights is they're being sued right now, and CELDEF is a wonderful legal organization, and they are helping Broadview Heights countersue. Basically what it's coming down to is people are waking up to see that the corporations have no consideration of the welfare of a community and what the people want. And so it's going to have to be folks like us who take a stand, say, no, this is not acceptable. We're going to create the best kind of law we can to protect. And the industry will probably sue us. And they'll put a lot of money into defeating this. So we're going to need a lot of grassroots people one-to-one, because we certainly don't have the money to compete with them. But we are not going to underestimate the city council. We are going to embrace them and enroll them, and hopefully they might find something they can stand behind. We definitely would love their alliance. So we'll send it out to them, but we're definitely not counting on it. The folks that have taken this on, the industry and their states have fought hard and long and against it. So it is a movement. I liken it to the shift from a slave economy to a non-slave economy. It took all kinds of tactics, and it took lots of time, and it took all kinds of people working hard because they knew it was the right thing to do. And we're working towards sustainable energy because it's what we have to do. And my objective to doing this is I want to do it fast enough so we don't turn Ohio into a sacrifice zone from all this waste. So we need your help, especially, and we organize on Monday evenings in Clintonville, and you can get that information on this website. But I also wanted to let you know, we're going to have an informational meeting like this at the end of every month until we get this on the ballot and vote for it. And next month, Tish O'Dell knows she knows about Bills of Rights, and she'll be really talking in detail about what we're doing in Columbus. But also, not only that, we're working on Franklin County as well, not just the city, but expanding it out. And then in March, Ray Beiersdorfer He's a geologist from Youngstown. He really knows about the earthquake issues, and he's going to be talking about earthquakes and fracking in March. So if you picked up one of these when you first came in, it might have been the old one. Make sure you get the most recent one that has Ray's information on it. What? Oh, yes.
The meeting in February is at Whetstone Library.
Yes, the meeting in February is at Whetstone Library, and the meeting in March is at the Unitarian Church, and they've very generously donated their space. Let's see, are there any more questions for Julie?
The second part of my question was,
Yes.
any state doing this right?
Is any state doing this right?
Well, there are a lot of states doing it better, okay? If you look at this part of the country, we are the worst, by far. Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Michigan have much better rules than we've got, and they're trying to make them stronger. New York just said, no, go away, we don't want to hear from you at all, okay? We're saying, you know, give us, you're tired, you're hungry, give us all your garbage, we'll take it too. So we're not only opening ourselves up to the problems from an Ohio effort for drilling, we're taking in everybody else's garbage too. We do that in Ohio. We pay for state and local governments with tipping fees from waste from out of state. We've been doing it for at least 25 years. Yes?
Have you been able to contact and talk to any representatives? I know Charlotte Tavares probably would be very interested.
Well, I've talked to some, but you know, we're going through the meeting process where you sit down and make your comments on all the draft rules, and then they just sit there and look at you. And I got a little pat on the head on the stuff we just looked at today, and one of the things that I said they actually included. So they always give me one or two, you know, so that they can say, well, we listened to Julie and we gave her this. But, you know, are we where we need to be? No. Yes?
I have a more technical question. You know, I don't think the public's aware of the radiation, and there's been a lot of misinformation that went out. Remember, the dispatch had this graph, and it showed, like, you know, radiation you get from a CAT scan, and comparing that, the NANA they had. So my question, is there any way that, for you, I mean, you've done this study a lot more in depth, to put out some kind of new finding to get people's attention?
The information that I have presented tonight was presented last September at Youngstown State to Ray's group, Energy and the Environment seminar. And they videotaped that, and it's a YouTube video. It's a little over an hour long. And it's fairly technical, but it goes through and discusses it. But you know, it's not me. US EPA put out the report that says, you know, we're getting less than 1% of what we ought to be getting if we do it the way that we're doing it. So.
And then you said the Department of Energy over in Pennsylvania has done this new study. And
and it started before the US EPA document came out. We've just had people that are much better at this than I am reviewing the Department of Energy study, the DEP study to see if they use the right technology. And they did. But what I'm going to tell you is what the press release says, and what you read back on page, 273 in Appendix C is not the same thing. Because you always have this big spin that says everything is fine. Like the health department people in Pennsylvania were really concerned, and they were basically told, if you open your mouth, you're going to get fired. And so they couldn't say anything until they retired. Well, it's the same kind of thing. The DEP cannot say, we've got a disaster on our hands, because they'll all get fired. So the press release says everything's fine. But the folks that are the technical reviewers think that the data is probably good. So you have to go back in and tear the data apart. And that's what the scientists and the engineers do. And you have to look at the data. But there's a slide I showed you in November that looks at the radioactivity of the shale. And black shale can be as much as 100 parts per million radioactive. 50 parts per million will give you an ore that you can pull uranium out of for enrichment. Please understand that these materials are within the range of a low-grade uranium ore. If this was anything else, if this was medical waste, if this was tailings from uranium enrichment, if this was anything else, there is no way they would be allowed to do this. But they got a Hail Mary pass. And so did the coal industry.
Yeah, but maybe somebody should do a study and say that the radiation in Ohio is higher than Iran has.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that that's true, because I can tell you that there are real problems in the Mideast from the contamination from their radiation in their pipes and in their programs. There are big chunks of the Mideast that are horribly radioactive from the oil and gas production.
Okay, one more question, and then we probably
Then
need
we
to
gotta
get
get
out
out
of here.
of
You have to pay for your ticket upstairs. You have to pay for your parking before you go out to your car. One more question.
So one more thing.
Yes.
Well, if you want to get in our listserv, I usually put out at least one message a week. Just reminding about our weekly meetings. If there's anything else that comes up of interest in the Community Bill of Rights and so forth, I'll put something out. If you want to be on the listserv, we have a sign-up sheet with that also.
Any more questions? Excellent. Check our website out. We have a lot of good information. Yes, Will.
Yeah, I just wanted to give everyone a heads up. So I'm collecting signatures. Deb and Devin are all collecting signatures for this election for city council.
Okay, for city council.
So I want to say that I'm here with you guys.
Yes.
Listen up real quick. Give Will a minute.
He knows you too.
Why don't you say your center? Folks, listen up.
So if I can have folks' attention real quick. So I'm Will Petrick, and I'm here. I also was working at the state level for the last 4 years, really frustrated by the conservative political landscape. But I've been really inspired by activists and people working together in cities across the country. Cities have moved on minimum wage. 11 cities last year increased their
May I have
wage.
your attention, please? The time is now 8:45, and the library will be closing in 15 minutes.
There's universal
Please make sure you have your
education. It's
pocket
been
ticket
passed
with
in New
you.
York, Denver,
You will
San
need to
Antonio.
update your ticket
And
before
I
exiting
want
the
to
library.
listen to the community. A lot of our elected leaders right now at the state level, national level, and in the city, are essentially not talking about the things that we're talking about in our communities. And I want to say that this is our city. This is our community. We should be part of the conversation about the future of Columbus and the direction of Columbus. So if you're willing to sign a petition, I have one. Deb has one. And Devin is also circulating here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.